Some men spend their whole lives looking for a seat at another man's table. I spent 34 years quietly buying the ground that table was standing on. You'll want to keep that in mind, because nothing I'm about to tell you makes a lick of sense until you understand that one thing about me. I never needed a chair. I owned the room. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Pour yourself a coffee, find a comfortable spot, and settle in. Every person you're going to meet in this story had a chance to act decently, every single one. They just decided they were too important to bother. Do me a favor before we start. Tap that like button, leave me a comment so I know you're out there, and make sure you've subscribed. I think you're going to want to be around for what comes next. It was the second Tuesday of October, the year I turned 63, Hamilton, Ontario. One of those bright, cold harbor mornings where the sky over the bay goes hard and blue and the maples up along the escarpment look like somebody set them on fire. I was out in my garage off Mountain Brow, up to my elbows in a 1972 Chevelle I'd been fussing over for the better part of 4 winters, when my phone went off on the workbench. My son. Calling at 20 to 10 on a workday. That's not right, I thought. Boy should be at the depot. He's been at that depot every weekday morning for 7 years. Hey, what's going on, son? Nothing at first. Just breathing. The kind of breathing a grown man does when he's holding himself together with both hands and it isn't working. I felt my whole chest go tight before he said a word. Dad. His voice broke clean in half on that one syllable. I'm down at Bayfront. Can you come? I was already peeling off my work gloves. Don't move. I'm coming. I found him on a bench near the water, down past the big anchor sculpture, where the path curls around, and you can see clear across to the lift bridge. The same stretch where I used to take him perch fishing when he was a kid, back before he was tall enough to cast, without hooking the back of his own jacket. Except he wasn't a kid anymore. He was 36 years old, sitting with his shoulders rolled forward, like there was a sandbag across the back of his neck. And next to him, my grandson. 5 years old, a little maple leaf's toque pulled down over his ears, a backpack hugged against his chest. He had that look kids get when they know something's gone sideways and nobody's explained it yet. Quiet, watchful. He was holding a box of Timbits in his lap with both hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. 2 duffel bags sat on the gravel at my son's feet. 2 bags. I didn't say anything right off. I sat down on the other side of my grandson, put my arm around him, and looked out at the water for a slow count of 5. Then I turned to my son. Why aren't you at work? He laughed. Not the good kind. The kind that comes out of a man when everything hurts so much that laughing is all that's left in the tank. I got let go this morning, Dad let go. I kept it flat. Even.
From Holloway.
The job you've had 7 years. I nodded slow. Stay level, I told myself. Whatever this is, you don't help anyone by losing your head in a public park. And the bags? He rubbed the back of his neck, couldn't quite meet my eye. Her dad came by the house last night. Came by, I said. To your place. Said he's been making calls. Turns out he golfs with the regional VP at the freight company. He stopped, swallowed hard. He's the one who got me cut, Dad. He set it up. My grandson tugged my sleeve and held up the box. Grandpa, these ones are the chocolate ones. Mom got me the chocolate ones. I looked down at that little face, his father's eyes, my late wife's stubborn chin. 5 years old, completely calm, because in his world the grown-ups still had everything under control. They sure are, Bud, I said. Good choice. Then I turned back to my son. Start from the front. Where's your wife? His eyes went red around the rims. She filed this morning. Separation papers. I sat with that one. The leaves kept coming down off the maples. The water kept slapping the rocks below the path. My grandson kept working his way through that box of Timbits like the bottom hadn't just dropped out of his whole family. He told her to, my son said, barely above a whisper. Her father. He called her after he left our place and told her that if she stayed married to me, he'd cut her off. House, money, the family, all of it. Said, he stopped, pressed his lips together. He said our bloodline wasn't worth the Holloway name, Bloodline. I let that word hang there in the cold air between us. Just let it sit, like something that had been dropped on the ground and neither of us wanted to be the one to pick it up. Dad, I don't. His voice cracked again. I don't even know what I did. I gave that family everything I had. 7 years. I coached his nephew's hockey team 2 winters running. I never missed a Sunday dinner. I reshingled that man's cottage roof up in Muskoka with my own 2 hands, didn't take a dime. He pressed the heels of his palms into his eyes, and he tossed us out like we were garbage. Like Owen was garbage. My grandson's head popped up at his own name. Grandpa, he said seriously, holding the box out toward me. You can have the last one. It's chocolate. I took it because some things you don't refuse. Thank you, son. That means a lot. I stood up, slow, the way I do when my head's already 3 steps down the road and my knees are just catching up. Grab the bags. My son blinked at me. What? The bags? Pick them up. I reached down and took my grandson's mittened hand. We're not doing this on a park bench in October. Up you get. Bud, Dad. Where are we even? Get in the truck. He knew that voice. Every son knows that voice. The one that doesn't take questions. He had both duffel bags over his shoulders before he could think of an argument. We drove up the Sherman Cut and got onto the link heading east. My son kept glancing over at me, waiting for me to say something fatherly, something soft, something that would take the sting out. I reached over and turned on the radio instead. Gordon Lightfoot. Felt about right. Dad. You're starting to scare me a bit. Good. I checked my mirror, signaled changed lanes. Means you're paying attention. Where are we going? Where are we going? 34 years I kept this thing quiet. 34 years of being up before the sun and home after dark, of handshake deals and reinvested every spare dollar and not one word to a living soul. Not my brother. Not my neighbors on the mountain. Not even my late wife's sister, who'd have spread it across 3 church basements by supper time. The full size of it I told nobody but the woman I married, and she carried it to her grave 4 years ago without ever once letting it slip. 34 years of being the fellow in the plain bungalow with the gravel drive and the old pickup. Because I watched what happened to my own father when the wrong people found out what he had. Watched men in good suits shake his hand on a Friday and gut him by the next quarter. Watched a lifetime of his work get carved up by people who smiled while they did it. I swore on the day we buried him that nobody would ever do that to me. Nobody would ever know enough to try. But my son's father-in-law had just made a different kind of mistake. He'd looked at my boy, my blood, my grandson in his little blue toque, and he'd decided we were beneath him. He'd pulled a string to wreck my son's career. He'd leaned on his own daughter until she signed papers against the man she loved. He'd sent a 5-year-old to a park bench with 2 duffel bags. On a Tuesday, in my city. We came off the highway down by the industrial belt out past Stony Creek, rolled past the container yards and the transport companies, until I turned in at a long private drive behind a complex that ran the better part of 4 city blocks. My son sat up straight in the passenger seat. The sign over the main gate was clean steel, no flash to it, just the name. Northbridge Logistics Group. Dad. His voice had gone quiet in a completely different way. What is this place? I parked the truck, shut off the engine, and sat there a second looking at what 34 years of keeping my mouth shut had built. This, I said, is yours. Always was going to be. I opened my door. And we've got a carrier meeting to reschedule. If you've stuck with me this far, do an old man a favor and hit that like button. It honestly helps these stories find the folks who need them. Thanks, friend. Truly. There's a particular kind of quiet that takes over a room when people realize they've spent years underestimating the man in front of them. It isn't loud. It isn't a slammed door or a raised voice. It just settles over everything, like the hush after the first real snowfall, when the whole street goes soft and white and nobody's tires have touched it yet. I've lived inside that quiet my entire working life. My son's father-in-law was about to make its acquaintance. Wednesday morning. 7:15. I was at Northbridge before the first shift badged in, the way I have been most mornings for 3.5 decades. You want to know the real health of a business, don't crack the books. Watch who shows up first, and who's the last one to leave. I'd been the first one through that door for 34 years. My office sits up on the 2nd floor, corner room, glass on 2 sides looking down over the sorting floor. Nothing fancy in it. A desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with numbers on it that would have made a grown man weep. On the corner of the desk, there's a photo in a plain frame. My son at 11, holding up a smallmouth bass we pulled out of Lake Erie off Long Point, grinning like he'd just won the cup. I look at that photo every single morning before I do anything else. That morning it landed different. My operations manager knocked twice and came in at 7:30 on the dot. Big fellow from up Sudbury way, been with me 19 years, knows every conveyor and forklift and loading dock in the place. He took one look at my face and lowered himself into the chair across from me. You want a coffee first, he said. Or should I just brace? Pull the Holloway file. His eyebrows went up about 1/4 inch. Holloway distribution, that's the one. He already had his tablet out. They're midterm. 18 months left on the carrier agreement, plus the warehouse lease on the Burlington side. They run, what, 2.6 million through us a year, give or take. 2.6 million. My son's father-in-law sat at his cottage and at his Sunday dinners, telling people about his thriving distribution outfit, never once mentioning that the engine under the hood of it, the freight network that made his quarterly numbers look so handsome, the warehouse space he'd never have qualified for on his own, ran straight through my company. The man called my bloodline unworthy while every truck he moved carried my logo on the trailer. I damn near smiled. Damn near. I'm not canceling anything, I said. He paused. All right, I'm restructuring it. I leaned back in my chair. Pull every clause tied to carrier performance review. I want a formal evaluation letter drafted. Plain language, nothing nasty. Notify Holloway that Northbridge is opening a full performance audit of the account, effective immediately. All scheduled payments to them held pending the outcome of Cole. That's my name, by the way. He's one of about 4 people alive who uses it. That's a hard hold. You can do it? It's in the agreement. Page 14, section 3. I know because I wrote it. I tapped the desk. 30 days to respond to the audit before we make a determination on continuing the relationship. He nodded slow, the way a man does when he understands that the thing that sounds routine is anything but. And who's running the audit? I picked up the photo of my son at 11, set it back down, facing me. The new director of carrier relations. He blinked. We don't have a director of carrier, we do, as of this morning. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with no sleep. He'd spent the night in his old bedroom for the first time in 14 years. Him and the boy both crammed into a single bed, my grandson sleeping like a stone in the middle, while his father folded himself around the edges. Dad, it's early, it's nearly 8:30. How's Owen? A pause. I heard him shift, heard him check on the boy. Still out, sleeping like nothing happened. That's because he knows he's safe, I said. You hear me? You both are. That doesn't change. Dad, listen to me. I said it the way I used to when he was a teenager driving me up a wall. Not as your father right now, as one grown man telling another. I need you down at Northbridge by 10. Wear something decent. We're going to walk the floor. I'm going to introduce you around, and then we're going to sit down, and I'm going to lay out exactly what I've been building all these years and exactly what your part in it looks like going forward. The line went quiet, then small. Dad, what is Northbridge? Oh, son, I picked up my coffee. It's ours. Has been since before you could walk. 10 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up before he could ask me anything else. Some things you can't do over the phone. He needed to stand in it. He came through the front doors at 4 minutes to 10. I watched him from up on the floor before he spotted me, watched him stop dead just inside the lobby and look up. Ceilings 40 feet over his head, conveyor lines and racking running in long, clean rows. A couple hundred people moving with the kind of practiced purpose that only comes from years of building a culture one good hire at a time. His mouth hung open a little. Good. That's the right reaction to have. My operations manager walked him over to me. By the time he reached me, he looked like a man trying to do long division in his head and getting an answer too big to be real. This whole time, he said. All these years. You drove a pickup with 200,000 on it, still do. Did Mom? She knew. I paused. She knew the parts that mattered, and she knew why we kept it close. I started walking, and he fell in beside me. Money does something to people, son. The wrong ones get a whiff of it, and all of a sudden everybody's got a handout and a hard luck story to go with it. I watched it take my own father apart. I wasn't going to hand anyone that knife. I looked at him sideways, and I wanted you to make your own way first. Earn your own confidence, so that whatever you became, you'd know you became it on your own steam, not because your old man had a checkbook. He was quiet a long stretch as we walked. People nodded at me. A woman from the receiving side came over and shook his hand and told him, "You've got your dad's handshake." He didn't know what to do with that. We ended up back in my office. I shut the door, poured us each a coffee, and laid 3 folders out across the desk. Financials, the org chart, and the Holloway account. He picked up the last one. I watched his face as he read. Watched the second he registered the company name on the front. Watched his jaw go tight. Holloway Distribution, he said quietly. That's his company. It is. He's a carrier here? For 9 years. Leases warehouse off us, too. He set the folder down real slow and looked up at me. You're telling me that while that man was sitting at his own dinner table calling us unworthy, he was making his money through your trucks. The room got very still. Then my son said, with a calm that honestly caught me off guard, "What's in the folder?" "A performance audit notice. Payments held pending review." I slid it toward him, standard procedure. "It's in his agreement." "And who's running the audit?" I slid the second document across. "A formal offer letter. Director of Carrier Relations, Northbridge Logistics Group." A compensation package that made his old depot salary look like a tip you leave on a table. His hands went still on the desk. "Dad, I've never done anything like this. I sorted freight. I scheduled trucks. I'm not—" "You shingled that man's roof in a weekend without complaining once," I said. "You can read a contract, and you'll have me in the next room the whole time." I leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to be cruel, son. I want to be real clear about that. We are not in the business of being cruel. We are in the business of being true. Those are not the same thing, and I'll thank you to remember the difference for the rest of your life." He looked at the offer letter a long moment. Then he picked up the pen on my desk, the cheap blue one I've had forever, and he signed it. While he was signing, my phone buzzed on the desk. His wife. My daughter-in-law. I'll be honest with you. Part of me wanted to let it ring. I was sore on his behalf, and a man holds a grudge for his own blood faster than for himself. But I've buried enough people in my life to know that you don't get to be the one who slams a door. Not if you want to look at yourself in the mirror after. So I answered. "It's me," I said. She was crying. Not the showy kind. The kind a person tries to bury and can't. Are they with you?" "Owen, is he?" "He's safe," I said. "He's at my place, sound asleep, surrounded by more Timbits than is good for a 5-year-old. Your husband's sitting right across from me. My dad doesn't know I'm calling." Her voice dropped. "He took my phone last night. I'm using my mother's. He told me you people were trash, that I'd married down, that he'd ruin." She stopped, pulled a breath. "I signed those papers because he stood over me and told me he'd put my mother out on the street too if I didn't. She has nowhere to go. She's been afraid of him for 30 years, and I never let myself see it." A pause. "I don't want this. I have never wanted this. I love my husband. I love my little family. Please tell me I haven't," I said. "Nothing's been wrecked that can't be mended. But that's a conversation you have with him, not with me. He's right here. You ready?" I handed the phone across the desk, watched my son's face the moment he heard her voice, watched 36 years of him I'd raised come up to the surface all at once. He stood and walked to the window and talked low for a long time, and I let him have it, and I looked out over the floor at all those people moving freight in the cold autumn light, and I thought, all right then. Maybe there's more to fix here than I figured. Maybe that's the better job. Here's the part I think about most. There's a story we tell ourselves about men like me, that we hide what we have out of greed or pride or some game we're playing with the people who love us. I've read it on my own daughter-in-law's face. I read it in my son's eyes that morning in the truck. And I'll grant you, from the outside it looks like a man holding his cards too close. But I didn't keep Northbridge quiet to play God with my son's life. I kept it quiet because I watched my father get fleeced by everyone who learned his number. And I decided my boy was going to grow up knowing he was loved without ever once wondering if he was loved for what he'd inherit. I wanted him to find out who he was when nobody was buying. And he did. He coached kids hockey for a man who despised him. He fixed a roof for free. He showed up. 7 years he showed up to a job and a family that turned on him, and he showed up decent the whole way through. That's not a man who needed my money to be worth something. That's a man who was already worth more than the lot of them. The money was only ever going to be the proof, written down where they couldn't argue with it. Now, let me tell you about the meeting. We rescheduled it for the Friday, 4 days after my son's father-in-law turned our world over. I had it set in the big conference room off the second floor, the one with the long table and the windows over the yard. I did not sit in. This wasn't my fight to win. I'd handed it to the right man, and a father who can't keep his hands off his grown son's work has no business calling himself finished raising him. So I stood out in the hallway, just past the door, where I could hear and not be seen. My son's father-in-law came in at 10 sharp. Charcoal suit, silver hair, the kind of watch a man wears so you'll notice it. He shook my son's hand the way you shake hands with the help. He had no idea. None. He thought he'd been called in to renegotiate a freight contract with some new fellow whose name he hadn't bothered to learn. I heard my son offer him a coffee. Heard him decline. Heard the small talk peter out fast, the way it does when one man thinks he's the most important person in the room and the other man knows better. "I'll be straight with you," my son's father-in-law said. "I understand there's a personal dimension here. I'm not blind to it. But business is business, and I don't see the value in letting family matters muddy what's been a profitable, professional arrangement for 9 years. You're right, my son said. A pause. The man hadn't expected agreement. Business is business, my son went on, which is exactly why I want to be completely professional about what happens next. We've had our team put together a revised agreement. New terms. Restructured rates that reflect current market value. Realistic performance benchmarks. Standard clauses, nothing punitive. I heard the soft slide of a folder across the table. Take your time with it. Quiet. Then the rustle of pages. I could picture it from the hallway. The man in the charcoal suit, working his way down through a document. 9 years of comfortable assumptions, coming apart line by line, prepared by the son-in-law he'd thrown out of his daughter's house 4 days back. 4 days. He'd torched my son's life on a Monday night, and by Friday morning the whole lifeline of his business was sitting in my son's hands, in a building owned by a man he'd never once thought to ask about. This rate structure, he started. Stopped. These benchmarks are aggressive. They're fair, my son said. I wrote them to be fair, not generous. Fair. You'll find that's different from how you've been treated, which is better. A longer quiet now. Who owns this company? There it was. The first crack. My father, my son said. He built it. 34 years. Quietly. Never asked anybody's permission or approval to do it. You've moved your freight through his network for nearly a decade. You've sat across cottage dinners from him without ever knowing his name because he made a point of it. A beat. You called us a bloodline that wasn't worthy. You made one phone call and took my job. You stood over your own daughter and frightened her into signing papers against me. And you ended up across this table from me, reviewing a contract that decides whether your company makes it through next year. Nobody in that room moved. I could feel it through the wall. Then his father-in-law's voice came again, and it had changed. Something underneath it now that hadn't been there walking in. Something older and quieter, like a man who's been carrying a heavy thing for a long while and can feel his grip finally giving out. What I said. About your family. He stopped on a word, couldn't get it out the first time. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a great many things for a long time, and I dressed it up as standards. As name. It wasn't. It was fear and it was pride, and I poured it out on people who never earned it. A breath. Your wife. I owe her more than I can. You do, my son said, not cruel. Just true. She called me. She told me what you did to make her sign. She told me about her mother. So here's where we are. A pause. She's coming home. That part's already done. She made that choice herself before any of this, the second she got to a phone that wasn't being watched. Whatever happens between you and her, whatever happens between you and her mother, that's yours to carry. But your grandson needs his grandfather. He's 5. He shouldn't have to inherit a feud. I stood out in that hallway, and I'll tell you my eyes weren't dry, because that was a more generous thing than I'd have managed at his age. More grace than the man across the table had earned, and more character than most fellows, twice my son's years, could have found in themselves. I appreciate that, his father-in-law said, and his voice wasn't steady anymore. More than you know. I'm not finished, my son said, and now his voice went quiet, the quiet that runs a room better than any shouting ever could. I need you to hear one thing, not as a carrier, not as my former father-in-law, as a man. A pause. My father built something real out of nothing, over 34 years, without ever asking to be seen. He built it for his family. For our name, the name you called unworthy. For my son. You looked at us and saw people beneath you, and now you're sitting in his building, signing a contract that keeps your doors open.
A beat.
My father taught me a long time ago that real power doesn't humiliate anybody. It doesn't have to. It just makes everything very, very clear. I closed my eyes out there in the hall. The silence that came after was the longest stretch of seconds I can remember. And then I heard it, the quiet, unmistakable scratch of a pen moving across paper. My son's father-in-law signed. My son signed under him. Calm, unhurried. The way a man puts his name to a thing he decided on days ago. Nobody made a speech. Nobody twisted the knife. Nobody raised a voice because there was nothing left to settle. Everyone in that room knew how it had gone, and nobody needed to say it out loud. I didn't go in. I never went in. I walked downstairs and out to the yard and stood next to my old pickup and looked up at the gray Hamilton sky for a long, quiet minute while the cold came off the bay. 34 years. Not one day of it had been about revenge. Not really. It had been about leaving something behind so solid, so deep in the ground, that when the storm finally came for the people I loved, they'd have somewhere real to stand. I thought about my father, pressing what little he had left into my hands the year before he died, his eyes saying everything his pride wouldn't let his mouth say. I thought about my boy at 11, soaking wet and grinning on the shore at Long Point. I thought about my grandson in his blue toque, dead serious, telling me the chocolate ones were the good ones, like it was the single most important thing I'd ever need to know. Bloodline, the man had called ours unworthy. This was our bloodline. A grandfather who built in silence. A son who showed up decent when showing up cost him everything. A daughter-in-law who found a phone and chose her own family the moment her father's hand came off her shoulder. A little boy in a hockey toque who didn't yet understand what was being kept safe for him, but who'd spend the rest of his life living inside the proof of it. There's no suit, no contract, no number in any account that measures that. My daughter-in-law was at my house when I got home. She'd come straight from her mother's, and her mother was with her, a small gray-haired woman with frightened eyes that were just starting to learn what it felt like to not be afraid. My grandson had the both of them down on the living room floor, showing them a tower he'd built out of every cushion in the house. He looked up when I came in. "Grandpa," he said, completely serious, holding up the very last Timbit from a fresh box. "This one's chocolate. I saved it for you. I took it because some things you never refuse." I got up early the next morning the way I always do, made my coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the frost burn off the lawn. Then I went out and started the old pickup, let it warm up, and drove down to Northbridge through my city, past the harbor and the lift bridge, and the long gray morning, the same way I've driven it for 34 years. Gordon Lightfoot on the radio. Nobody watching. Nothing to prove. Quietly. Completely. Still standing. If this one meant something to you, do me the kindness of hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw family first stories, and send it along to somebody who needs to hear it today. As always, thank you for being part of this. I'll see you on the next one.